I'm not going to expand too much on this, as our country director, Ms. Maria Rahman, will fill you in on, on that part of it. In this program, you will hear a few words from Maria, the High Commissioner, Randula De Silva from GLX, and Vikum Rajapaksa, who's also been on this journey with us almost from the start. This will be followed by a panel discussion and Q&A, which is where I think the audience will be able to participate more fully. The discussion will be followed by refreshments and a live band, and we hope that you will all enjoy that part of the evening as well. I have just a few housekeeping tips and health and safety points. Please switch off your phones, and in case of an emergency, if the fire alarms go, stay where you are and we will guide you out. Hopefully it won't come to that. The event is being live streamed on our Facebook page, and a recording will be available on British Council and GLX social media channels, which I think for us it'll be Facebook and YouTube, and GLX, you can talk a little bit more about it. Okay, without further ado, I will hand over to Maria Rahman, the Country Director of the British Council in Sri Lanka.
Your Excellency, Sarah Holton, British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, esteemed guests, and all of our partners. A very warm welcome to the British Council, and I really want to thank everyone here today for taking a gamble on the weather and joining us. Fingers are crossed that we make it through to the end of this event without too much rain. So I like to begin all of my speeches by telling you, and actually it's my job to tell you, who the British Council is, what we do, and why we do it. So in a nutshell, we build connections, understanding and trust between people in the UK and other countries through our work in arts and culture, education, and the English language. These connections, we believe, lead to an understanding of each other's strengths and the challenges and the values that we share. But I think it's our history, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, that tells the best story for why we do this. Some of you may know that the British Council was set up in the 1930s, so it's almost 100 years old actually, in the aftermath of the Wall Street crash, which led to the Great Depression. There was a huge drop in international trade, fall in living standards, and high and persistent unemployment. The great challenge of that time was the threat to our shared values in Europe and in the UK, to prosperity and to security. The economic hardships people were facing were leading to a rise in extremist views, and obviously we can also look at the rise of Nazism at that time as one of those extremism, one of the examples of rising extremism. The great challenge of that time was that threat to our shared values, and the creation of the British Council in 1934 was one way that the UK government reacted to this growing threat. Back then, the British Council had many centres throughout the UK, and it offered English teaching and cultural exchange. And these centres provided a haven for bringing people together and building connections between the UK and other countries. And our purpose today remains focused on building connections, understanding, and trust. We work in two ways, with individuals to transform their lives, and with governments and partners to make a bigger difference for the longer term, creating benefits for millions around the world. I'm always very excited about working with partners because it's through working with others that we feel we make the biggest difference and actually learn more about each other too. And for that reason, I've loved our partnership with Lanali and Randala and GLX, the Good Life X, or Accelerator. I'm never sure if I should say Good Life X or Good Life Accelerator. Lanali and Randala and their teams describe the present moment with all of its complexities as a generational challenge that needs them to lead from the future. This is a phrase I absolutely love. The imperative here is to find solutions for our shared challenges that are not merely sustainable, but also regenerative. And I'm going to actually leave the explanation for what that means to Lanali and to Randala as well. But this was the vision and the approach for our partnership, and perhaps also the secret for its success. So I just want to thank, very briefly, the team at GLX for the work they've done promoting the creative industries through this partnership. And I'm very happy indeed to be here today to celebrate with our friends and our partners the journey so far. I look forward to more and more exciting collaborations and successes in the future. And without further ado, I will now introduce Her Excellency Sarah Holton for some more words about the creative industries. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you so much for that, Maria, and for the invitation here today, and to British Council colleagues as well. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'm Sarah Holton, the British High Commissioner. I'd like to add my welcome to all the guests and partners at the event, representatives from the Honourable Minister's Office, diplomatic colleagues, the Good Life X or Accelerator team, and representatives from across the creative industries. It is really good to see you here. So in 2001, the creative industries were defined by the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport as those industries which have their origin in individual creativity, skill and talent, and which have the potential for wealth and job creation through the generation and exploitation of intellectual property. Now, I expect for most of us here, we're familiar with the potential and value that the creative and cultural industries can bring to employment, innovation, and economic growth. But I wanted to highlight some of the examples which I think really illustrate this. So in the UK, in 2019, the creative industries contributed £116 billion in gross value added income, growing twice as fast between 2011 and 2019 than the rate of the UK economy as a whole. In 2018, it was calculated that the creative economy employed 3.2 million people in the UK. And global figures reflect this too. So figures from the United Nations tell us that as early as 2015, the creative industries contributed $2,250 billion to the global economy and employed almost 30 million people. Creative and cultural industries are also future-proof. The more a job depends on creative thinking and social and emotional intelligence, the less easy it's going to be to commodify or for it to be done by machines. So through innovation, creative thinking and agility, creative economies can also positively benefit other areas of the economy, what we call a spillover effect from everything from health and education to tourism and retail. But as I'm sure everyone here would agree, creative industries are more than just economic generators with purely commercial value. Through film, arts and craft, design, photography, fashion, and much more, they also tell us a unique story about a place and its people. The rate of growth in creative industries, their lower barriers to entry, also mean that they can offer opportunities to economically marginalised groups, providing that networks and policies exist to support creativity and innovation. In an important landmark, 2021 marked the UN International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. And that brings me neatly to the Creative and Cultural Industries Report in Sri Lanka, which the British Council launched in May 2020. This report was the first of its kind for Sri Lanka and provided exploratory mapping of the state of the cultural and creative industries here. The report concluded that the creative and cultural industries have considerable potential to contribute to the economy of Sri Lanka. Its top recommendation was to position Sri Lanka as an ethical and sustainable creative hub, creating a unique selling point for the country within the wider region, supported by its strong labour and environmental legislation. In 2021, the British Council entered into a partnership with the Good Life Accelerator to implement the programme Creating a Regenerative Future. This 5-part conversation series, paired with a residency programme, which I think we're about to hear more about, was an innovative take on the connecting the dots between the creative industries, circular economy, and the innovation ecosystem. Which brings us to today and the purpose of our event, to highlight and demonstrate the potential and value of the creative economy through the work done by the British Council and GLX. So I want to thank everyone who took part in the residency and the conversation series, and for joining us today to celebrate your contribution to Sri Lanka's creative industries. Our work with you and support to creative entrepreneurs is our contribution to a bigger journey of recognition and growth for the creative sector. And I can't wait to hear more about it. Thank you ever so much for having me here today.
So our next speaker will be Randula De Silva from GLX. She's the CEO and founder of the Good Life Accelerator, GLX, and our partners in the program Regenerating a Creative Future. We wanted to partner with GLX as they're a dynamic, very talented, women-run team who have proven to be positive and can-do partners. Their passion for their work, their contribution and concern to issues of circularity, sustainability, and the work they are doing with creatives have made them ideal partners for us. Lonali Rodrigo from the House of Lonali Fashion House needs no introduction. She has had a long association with the British Council and was recently selected for the British Council program Making Matters. Her short video for the program will play later. And here I would like to acknowledge the Making Matters program, which is part of the British Council's program in the UK, for all their support and their contribution to this, especially the conversation series that we had. Randula De Silva is the CEO and founder of GLX and also has just returned from a stint as a Chevening Fellow in Oxford. I won't go further into, she will talk more about the program and hopefully herself.
Thank you, Manika, for that introduction, and moreover for really putting together this beautiful, beautiful afternoon for us. A very good afternoon to everybody, Your Excellency, Sarah Hilton, dignitaries from the foreign missions as well as the government, and everybody who accepted our invitation and came here. My name is Randula De Silva, and I'm going to walk you through and give you an insight about our journey, about Good Life X. It's not Good Life Accelerator anymore, it is Good Life X. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we came to be and what got us into doing this work together with British Council and the amazing creative talents that we've been working with, such as Lonali and the other residents. I don't have power over my presentation today, so I'm going to depend on the very... Okay, great. So that's the next slide. I assume you'll get it right as I speak. So our journey began when we identified really a gap between what Sri Lanka has, what Sri Lanka is excited about, and what the world is asking for. If you take a look at what we have as a country, for decades and decades, we all know that we are inherited, not only with man-made crisis, but we are inherited with lush, abundant natural resources that are rather unspoiled compared to our neighbors, as well as our global residents in other countries. But what are we really doing? Sorry guys, you've got to help me out here. But I'm going to continue my story. But what are we really doing here about what Sri Lanka has? On the other hand, there's a lot of excitement into tech, into entrepreneurship, into innovation. And I come with a background of working in the tech entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem for a very long time. So I do know that there's a lot of money, a lot of interest, and a lot of energy that goes into that sector for a very, very long time. But that does not necessarily mean that these two things are working together. There's just two disconnected dots. What Sri Lanka has to offer in its abundant natural resources and what Sri Lanka is excited about, and you know, the talent, all the talent that goes into working in tech and tech only, and looking at tech only as an end and not a means that helps us generate value from our abundant natural resources. While that story is prevalent here in Sri Lanka, we have the global phenomena where the conscious consumers are rising, asking different questions from people like you folks who are here, who are into designing in the craft sector, who are fashion designers, as well as creative entrepreneurs. If your parents were in this sector 20, 30, even 10 years ago, the questions you get and the questions they got are completely different. People are asking about transparency, people are asking about traceability, people are asking about ethical sourcing, and people are very, very interested to know about the origins of where this, where the consumables comes from. And we've got it all as Sri Lanka. There's not much work we have to do to give the world what it wants. But are we really doing it? No. We are in a constant game of building Me Too companies, building Me Too brands, where we are imitating a lot of things that the West got wrong, where the West really is trying to rectify in rapid speed, but we are really catching the wrong end of that tail. So our effort really started with seeing this phenomena and wanting to connect these disconnected dots, and that was the birth of Good Life X. Next slide, even though it's like this, please bear with me. And our idea of bridging these gaps started in 2018. We went on to create a pilot accelerator. That's why the whole X and accelerator phenomena comes from. We started as a pilot accelerator just dedicated for food and agriculture startups, and we worked with 6 companies. And why did we do a pilot? Because a lot of people couldn't understand what we were trying to do. We walked around for like 6 to 8 months trying to convince partners in Sri Lanka as well as outside to work with us, but accelerator, especially a sector-specific accelerator, was not very common back then, so we had to show and tell. So we just created the pilot project together with a donor who supported us back then, GIZ Sri Lanka, and then we moved on into 2020 where we created 3 different programs working not only with food and agriculture sector but also travel and hospitality. Something very special happened in 2020 along with COVID. We were all stuck inside our homes, and there was a Wednesday night call that happened with similar-minded creatives and entrepreneurs. And that's when I get to know Vikum very well. You'll hear from him later. I've known of Vikum, I've known of his brand, but I've never really interacted with him closely because I come from another sector. Vikum is representing a different sector. Lonali was the bonding factor. I've known her for 10 plus years because I'm a consumer of her brand. But COVID really helped us to stay in touch and exchange ideas, frustrations, visions, fears, and hope, really, on a weekly basis. And in 2020, I had a make or break moment. I had a choice whether to keep my accelerator within that donor institution or to make a spin-off and take it out and create a private entity out of it and come out with it. So it really was a choice of taking that risk or finding something else to do. And I jumped in because I was in conversation with these people and I knew I was not going to be alone. So I say that story with a lot of heart there because 2020 was really the defining factor for us. So come 2021, we register ourselves as a private limited company in February, and then we go on to do different programs, not only as an accelerator, but also for SMEs, larger companies, working in food, sustainability, creative design, wellness, travel, and all sorts of spaces that are connected to nature-based value chains. This year has been our biggest and the let's say the deepest year in terms of impact because we finished and created and finished a very new program with the British Council's support on creative industries and innovating in creative industries and bringing in a regenerative outlook into that whole works. And also we've gone on to work with a very special partner, Dilma. I'm happy to have them at the audience as well, where we are working with 3 key and inherent ingredients to Sri Lanka, and we are creating 2 more very specific tools related to regenerative economy. So that's a little bit about who we are, because Good Life X can sound very abstract, but this is really what we do, and that's really our birth story. This is the number of companies we've worked with so far, largely in the travel sector also because they needed so much of support to think outside of the box that they were in during the pandemic and create innovative pivots in order to stay alive, stay sustainable, keep their businesses afloat, not fire their employees, but find different ways that they could remain closer to the people, closer to the planet. So this is the composition of our work until beginning of this year. And by end of 2022, I think we'll be hitting 110 companies. Oh, there's one before that. No? Okay. So the slide that was supposed to be there is why creative industries. And I'll just unpack that a little bit. We've been working in sectors like tourism, agriculture, food, wellness. And what we really saw, again, was another gap. There was so much that creativity could do in these sectors, and it just wasn't happening. There was so much innovation that could come into these sectors in a very creative way, it just wasn't happening. So what could we do to bridge those gaps? So you can see the trend here, right? We just identify one gap, we go deeper in to that rabbit hole, we identify another gap, and we invent something to bridge that gap. That's how we work. And that's what really excites us. So with British Council, when we met Manika and Maria, it was very easy to synchronize and identify why creativity needed to meet innovation in order to bring in concepts of innovation and sustainability in order for us to really plug ourselves into a much more regenerative economy that thrives together with people and planet. If I give you an example, post-war, the tourism industry really peaked. A lot of people invested into that industry. But was that money going into the industry in the most sustainable manner? Did all the things that come up post-2019 create sustainable livelihoods for the communities? Perhaps not. It is because it's just unconscious money that's just going into a sector that seems very attractive in terms of profits, but there's a lot of other things that needs to be considered in order for it to really sustain and thrive together with the environment it's set up in and together with the people and the communities that it's set up in. So we are talking thriving with the nature, we're talking conservation economy as opposed to paving the beaches, if I just give a very simple example. Right? So what we really wanted to do was create a conversation around what's happening out there in the world that is so close to home. that's just at our fingertips, and we don't look at it close enough because it's just so close to us. And it goes amiss just like that because we are too familiar with it. So we wanted to interpret a few such words. Circular economy is one. Next slide, please. Biomimicry is another one. Lateral thinking is another. Creative industries, and finally, corporate social responsibility. These are 5 lexicons that we picked out for our conversation series that we could elaborate in local languages, in Sinhala and Tamil, what this really meant in practice. And unpack it a little bit. How can this really apply to our daily lives, the work that we do, the businesses that we create and we run, so that we really build it up in a conscious way with conscious effort going into it. And it was a very interesting conversation series, and I had the absolute privilege of creating that together with Lonali, where we brought in a very diverse mix of people. If you couldn't catch the conversation series, I do invite you to go to the YouTube channel or the Facebook page of British Council, because it's still out there. We brought in together scientists, innovators, creatives, academics, to sit together around one panel and to unpack this word according to their respective industries and sectors. And all were Sri Lankans. There were a few UK resources who came in, who brought in the global perspectives, but it was astonishing to see how much of a gap there was in that single point where people met as well. So that there was a lot of learning curves there and a lot of interesting learnings that we got out of that as well, and it was such a privilege to have had that conversations. And in the conversation was the creative residency. This was April 2022. Wasn't an easy time for all of us to leave Colombo, leave Galface, and go to Ahangama. We had 10 innovators and creatives coming together to work together for 5 days in a creative space, a co-living space in Ahangama. And we had architects to graphic designers, to fashion designers, to coders, who got to understand each other's thinking, understand how they saw the world, how they saw creativity, and how they unpacked ideas and how they solved problems. Interestingly, how we started the residency was getting them to cook their first meal together, because we really believe that food bonds people. And that was really a fun experience for most of them, and including us who got to eat the food. But what I wanted to say was, our methods and our ways of going into very deep, complicated topics are very simple, and that has always worked. This is a beautiful drawing that Lonali did to explain what we are exactly trying to address. So all that I just said in the past 5 minutes, this is Lonali in one A4 sheet. How creative industries can really trickle into the main economy of the country to steer it in one direction, and that where we can get people to collaborate together, to have conversations and lead from the future. So it was an absolute pleasure and a privilege to work with British Council and to have Manika working with us very, very closely. And for Lonali and me, representing the same generation, excited with the same things, coming from very different sectors, to understand that we were also trying to solve the same problem. I think the residency did a lot of things to us too. And most importantly, I don't have that picture here, we had Manika just chilling in a corner, playing with her camera, and we had another photography enthusiast coming to Manika, talking to her about the camera she was holding, because that's not a device she's seen before. And they got to bond and exchange and even talk about what happened when Manika was her age. That girl was 22, 24, I think, and how she was part of the feminist movement back then, and how photography came to play a part. And that triggered a spark in us. Look, intergenerational conversations can do so much. And there's a gap to be bridged there too. So there were so many sparks that came about out of this residency that weren't intended at all. And these are all treasures that we gathered as we went into the residency that we are taking back home with us, so that we create more and more methods to address these things so that creativity and innovation thrives in our economy. So this is, sorry, this slide is not supposed to have letters all over the place, but this is my team. And you can see where the creativity and the spark comes from. Anushka and Aj has very strong connections to the creative industries in their professions and in their families as well. They are my directors and shareholders who happily joined our vision and mission. Vihangun, he's an agricultural entrepreneur. He has his own startup who's building irrigation systems and having 60 acres of organic farming in Anuradhapura, but he's also our COO. And you can see a very young and thriving team here. And this whole effort was led by Emma De Silva, who is born and bred in the US and chose to come and live in Sri Lanka just 2 years ago because she wants to give back and find her roots. And we are so privileged to have reverse brain drain happening as we speak, because the more we have innovative things happening in the country, more people will come and work with us, and that is really what we are trying to induce. These are our partners. I'm not going to go into it. And that's it? Yes, okay. So this is a nutshell about who we are and what we did. But for us, creative sector and creative economy in itself is something that is so interesting because it holds a massive potential for all other sectors that we are working in. And we see creative industries and innovation in creative industries as the biggest link that can plug every other industry to thrive to its best potential. So this is what brought us to this work, and I'm again very, very thankful to British Council for recognizing the need to do this work, for saying yes to such an abstract idea, for saying yes to working with such a young company, and to Lonali for being the absolute best partner in crime to be putting this together, and that I'm still very excited to work with. And to all the residents who applied and took part. 5 of them are not in the country anymore. 3 of them are at a fellowship, 3 different fellowships, and 2 of them are traveling on business. But we are very happy to have the other residents who are here, and all the experts who came in to create conversations, to conduct the workshops, and to really merge and bond with these creatives to expand their minds and to explore further territories. So thank you so much for your support, and that's it from me. Have a very good evening.
Thank you, Randula, for that very uplifting and positive, wonderful presentation. So our next speaker is Vikum Rajapaksa. I won't mention what he's going to talk about because I was quite intrigued by the title of his talk. Vikum is a co-founder and director of Kantala, a sustainable vegan fashion accessory brand working with a 300-year-old traditional craft sector to design, source, and market a range of products that empower artisans and communities and regenerates the environment, and provides customers with conscious and ethical range of fashion accessories. He is also co-founder and partner of Positive Impact Consultancy, a collective of practitioners sharing their knowledge and experience with the private sector, government, development sector for mission-driven change to deliver positive impact. He's also been on this journey with us from the start almost as a member of the original steering committee, so when we were doing the mapping exercise and so on, and has always been very positive support for us. Vikum.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you to the British Council, GLX, Randula Lonali and the team for inviting me to speak here today. And actually, thank you very much to the British Council because Something that I always reiterate is collaboration is the way that we actually amplify the impact that we make. And sometimes for us entrepreneurs, especially in the small, medium sectors, we're in a day-to-day, daily firefight. So sometimes having a collaborative partner who comes externally to drive a conversation around something like the creative industries, the creative economy, also helps us to rethink about where we are coming from and actually where we are going to. And so it's also on that note that, so I'm going to share a little experience about the brand, the company that I co-founded, Cantala, and how it kind of associates with the creative economy, but also in specifically, there's something unique that we work with, and Cantala is actually inspired and based upon the indigenous cultural intellectual property of a 300-plus-year-old artisan craft. So myself and my co-founder and everyone else at Cantala, just like what Lonali does Randula does at GLX, we are also just connecting dots. Because in Sri Lanka, we always like to talk about 2,500 plus years of history. But we also have to ask ourselves, what have we done with it? It's only so much that we can continue to repeat the history without actually figuring out how does it contribute to our future. And that's where myself, my business partner, co-founder Nadishan, actually became really inspired. So we were actually back in 2013 doing a 9-to-5 job in one of Sri Lanka's largest corporates, very comfortable life, but always there was this kind of something missing, something that we felt was missing in the journey that Sri Lanka can go on, what we can do, and also in terms of the equitable distribution of our country's economic growth, because we all know the disparities are increasing. So what do we do? How do we go about connecting the communities, underprivileged communities, with the global economy and growing together as a country? So that's where I kind of took the inspiration originally from Sri Lanka's craft sector, because I had read a lot about how our indigenous crafts are becoming extinct, how younger generations aren't taking up the crafts, and how this knowledge, this beautiful work is going to be lost, and with itself, its capacity as an economic asset to contribute to our country. So I used to drive around on weekends after work. On weekends, I used to drive to different artisan villages. Sri Lanka has quite a large number of them spread throughout the country. Thankfully, I didn't have to drive too much. And I came across this one craft community called the Dumbara Hana Weavers, who were practicing generation after generation in the same village, a craft that was founded 300 plus years ago. So it has a really nice story. So two brothers who were farmers back then were quite the arty duo. So they like to try things, they like to create things. And they created this mat. They wove using a natural fiber, a wall hanging. And back in the days when it was the Kandyan kingdom, Sri Lanka's last kingdom, it was there was this, in the feudal system, you take your wares, your creations to the king, and you go and present it. So they present it to the king, and the king absolutely fell in love with this wall hanging. And then he said, I want you two to be my official suppliers for wall hangings to the palace. And this community was given what is called a royal deed. In Sinhala, we call it a gambara. Was given, and these two brothers were given residence in an area called Manikinna, so not too far from the Kandy city. And I mean, for generation after generation, just kept on coming down one generation after generation in the same village. And that's where I went back in December of 2012. And I was absolutely inspired. I was inspired by the creation. And now back then I did not know anything about, I actually didn't know anything about social enterprise. I didn't know anything about creative economy, but it was just a passion for what creative elements in Sri Lanka, this IP. So thinking about this, and like as I said, I was coming from a corporate background. I thought I am a know-it-all. I know how to set up a business, run a business. I thought like, my education background, I was like, what? I can go and tell these guys what to do. But honestly, as I immersed myself, I kind of started learning, and it was a very humbling experience. Learning about the intricacies, the depth of consideration, consciousness, and mindfulness in these indigenous crafts. So it was very, because we were going there purely to encourage the current artisan generation and the younger generation to weave what they were doing throughout the years. And for us then to make it into a vegan, sustainable fashion accessory. But as we immersed ourselves, and we were absolutely humbled to learn and to unlearn, because what we learned was something entirely different to the way we as consumers today are living through. And this was the whole idea of custodianship, because they lived in an era, these crafts were founded in an era where people believed and accepted their roles as custodians of the environment and the community. That everyone is interconnected and everyone has a role to play in safeguarding and allowing the environment to regenerate, so that the next generations and the generations after have the resources to live as comfortably as them. So I'm throwing a few kind of terms that you would have heard already about regeneration, creative. So now I'm just hearing these back then. And I haven't contextualized, like put this into a framework or anything back then. And that's when I kind of, both myself, our co-founder, and everyone at Cantler, we started realizing how much we've changed over the years, over the centuries. From being custodians, how the Industrial Revolution turned us into customers, and how the dot-com boom changed us into consumers, and how now the metaverse is going to bring us even to another level called users. So there is a level of agency that back so many years ago that people had as determining what they use, how they use it, and also understanding their impact. So I mean, now all of these just keep on coming to us, and that's why I said it's just like an entire, I studied economics for 3 years, done other stuff, and I never heard about these in universities back then. And that's when we really started realizing that all of these indigenous knowledge has so much to help a world that currently needs to heal, a global environment that needs to regenerate. We know, if you heard about the Earth Offshoot Day, which measures how quickly we consume resources the Earth can replenish in an year, we currently have an Earth Overshoot Day in July. So if the Earth takes 12 months to replenish the resources we use, we actually consume it in about 6 to 7 months. So we actually need 2 Earths to sustain the way we live right now. So there is where then we came to the point that actually, as a brand that has been inspired by all of these, how do we actually then connect it to where the world is going? What the current, and actually at Cantler we no longer like to call our people who buy our products as customers or consumers. We actually like to call them custodians. They're custodians of the handbags we make, because we want them to use it carefully, value it, and hopefully pass it down to the next generation. And then, now connecting everything together, so like I said, there was a creation 300 years ago. So they've been creating something new in generation after generation. And then there was the regeneration, the way they brought everything together, very conscious, mindful about the impact. So today we are talking about the creative economy. And this is why I believe Sri Lanka has so much of untapped indigenous knowledge, cultural IP, that we can actually use, learn, and leverage to connect with the global market and actually provide leadership to the way industries work, to lead the conversation inspired by our own cultural heritage, to lead the conversation on how industries can change, can act, but also how people can learn to buy products, use products, and also to become custodians in what they use. So without taking any further time, I hope that kind of gives you, through our own experience, how we've come to appreciate the value of indigenous IP, to value our cultural IP, and to remind everyone that we actually don't need to look too far beyond our shores. The inspiration is here in Sri Lanka itself. It's just now for us to really understand, learn, and start connecting the dots. And we will have a thriving creative economy, which we need more than ever, given the current context, and to make sure that we have equitable growth and that we leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikum. That was also very inspiring. So I think we all need to call for a lobby group, really. So our next item is a panel discussion where Vikum will moderate, Lonali, Randula, and Tashiana Handy. Tashiana was one of the residents on our residence program, participants on our residency program, and a creative herself. So, sorry, I'm just waiting for them to put the...
It's, I mean, for myself, it's actually an immense honor and privilege to share the stage with all of these three amazing individuals. I mean, I've known now since what Randula said, got to know her very well during, I mean, actually, I know COVID absolutely wreaked a lot of hurt and pain throughout the world, but it also gave us an opportunity to really connect. And again, like I say, I'm absolutely inspired to share with the stage with both Randula, Tashana, and Lonali. So the purpose of this panel is really for me to ask a few prying questions, try and bring a little bit more out from the three of them. Really where the creative economy in Sri Lanka is today, and also where we are going forward, like where are we heading? Where do we need to go? And what do we need to get there? Now, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time asking them questions about the status quo, because I know we've spoken a lot about the struggles, the SMEs. I mean, most of us are from the SME sector. So sometimes a lot of the challenges we face today are not entirely unique to us. But therefore, I'd like to spend a lot more time asking them and inquiring from them about where next from here. So, I mean, my first question, Randula, it's to you. So now, both in your speech and in your presentation and my speech, we both touched upon certain strengths, certain system. I mean, you elaborated a lot about connecting the dots, and something I always like stickers. So I was like going through all of the stickers over there, and something I really love is collaboration. And first, my question to you is, for Sri Lanka's creative economy to realize its true potential, what's the role of collaboration and about ecosystems? How do we, us, as those stakeholders in the sector itself, what do we need to do to build ecosystems? And from a policy point of view, what do we need the policymakers to contribute in terms of ecosystem building?
Thank you, Vikum. I was ready to go into the answer, and then you throw in the word policy, and then in my head, I went on a side route. I'll begin there, and this answer is going to be controversial, and I apologize for that. If policy was to change anything, I don't think we'll be here today as a country. We'll be very far ahead. Unfortunately, policy hasn't done a positive or played a positive role towards enabling economic development, sadly. So I think the best thing that could be done from a policy context is to create an enabling environment and really remove barriers and get out of the way. Most importantly, we all work with small holder businesses, smaller businesses, and we know how much of institutional barriers are there for a person to begin something and to sustain and to survive and to grow. I mean, us being a small business right now, there's so many hoops and jumps that we have to jump through. And it takes a lot being a Sri Lankan, I think, should be in our CV as a qualification, because it's so tough to do things here. And that shouldn't be the case. So that essentially is the single most simplified role of policy. We can all get together and write the most visionary, futuristic policies. But when it comes to implementation, we all know it really stays in a printed booklet, sadly. And I happened to speak with an engineer, an uncle, the 65-year-old person, who was an engineer who converted into an environmentalist. And there's so many policy papers that he's written together with a lot of institutions from his days to now that are in his closet. So action is what we need, and I think that's where collaboration comes in. Collaboration not only with creative entrepreneurs, but again, multidisciplinary stakeholders coming together, working together. And this could include the government too. I'm not saying the private sector alone can make changes, but of course we have seen a lot of change that has happened in Sri Lanka has come through the SME sector and the private sector. So private sector truly is setting the stage and leading, and the best the government could do is to play a very supportive role in following that lead. But I think the most important thing that we need to do when we collaborate is that asking the right questions of understanding what are we collaborating for and the values that we collaborate on. That those are essential and small things that we haven't got right in the past. And most of the things that we come together and do end up being destructive because we've missed the single most value point of regeneration or community or environment when we come together to collaborate and do something. But what's different, I think, in our generation is that we are all about growing the pie versus splitting the pie. It's not about what I take home alone as an individual or what you're getting out of it. It's about us really growing as an ecosystem and industry. And there's very many more examples where that's been demonstrated, where private sector players of our generation, plus policymakers of our generation, has come together to really push the needle, to create conversations and to create examples through action more than anything. So collaboration is most important because we need to break away from the linear way of doing things. We need to be very multidisciplinary. We need to be very lateral in the way we do things. You'll find that in our sticker card as well. Lateral, we're a big fan of that approach. And this is something that I picked up at Oxford as well. Everything needs a creative on the table, whether it's medical sciences or fashion industry. It really doesn't matter. Everything needs a scientist on the table. Everything needs a business person on the table. So we need to get out of our silos of excellence. We are very good at what we do alone, but how do we work on something that is meaningful and purposeful in rectifying a lot of wrongs that has been done before us? That's where we need to come together, and that's why collaboration is important.
Thank you, Randula. And so, moving on with the collaboration topics. So, Tasha, congratulations, first of all, on completing the residency. And I know it was a very collaborative experience. So, looking back on the residency, can you share with us how that felt, the power of collaboration, what you took away from it? What was the experience like?
Well, for me, the experience was incredible. Also because the specific point in time in which it happened. I think at the time, things were kind of going downhill very fast. And we had collectively decided at that very week, I think the night before, that despite what was going on, we're going to, prioritize this residency. And I think that was a decision that as all the residents kind of struggled with, because we were wondering if we were doing the right thing in terms of like breaking away and trying to focus on how we could collaborate together. But that experience really taught me a lot about working together in times of crises, especially because we had just emerged out of, it was a post-COVID situation, mid-crisis, we're still mid-crisis. And I think the temptation with creatives such as myself is to go into a mode of isolation and to work alone because it's easier, but also you're being kind of confronted with wall after wall after wall, and collaborating that environment is just so much more challenging. But what I really enjoyed about this program was that the environment in which this collaboration took place was playful, and it was a moment in which we could kind of build community through a sense of playfulness, whereas a lot of programs that kind of prioritize collaboration, it's very structured. It's very much you're supposed to come up with an end product by the end of the program, and that can be very debilitating because it commodifies your work in a lot of areas and in a lot of ways. And as creatives, it can be really difficult to work through that. But I think kind of being in that point, collaborating in that point in time together and working through some of the frustrations and some of the difficulties that we've collectively had in a more collaborative, playful environment was something that was key to, I think, sustaining my practice as a creative especially. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And I'm no doubt if Randula and Lonali is involved in those kind of things, I mean, it's always going to be very fun and enjoyable. So, Lonali, to you. So now both, most of what Tashana and Randula touched on was more collaboration on a horizontal scale, collaborating with peers maybe at a similar level. Now, in your particular work as a fashion designer, and you work with the supply chain, the traditional mindset of working with supply chains is along power dynamics of one being the supplier, the other being the buyer, and it's not always known as a very collaborative structure. In your work, I'm asking this because I know that you work in a very collaborative environment with your supply chain, but to share with the audience, the power of collaboration in the supply chain, how that actually makes your supply chain better, but also in terms of looking at the more creative economy side of it and the fact that we need to be looking at equitable growth. How collaboration also empowers your supply chain to share in the growth of the economy, the country. So through your experience.
Yeah, so I think the most important side when you talk about for my supply chain is the SME sector and the sustainable practices. Being a part of the SME sector and also working with the SME sectors, this is about 50% of our income generation. So being part of that is very important, and because I feel if we can make an impact to the economy, that's the part to play with. And they are, how do we recognize them first? First, we need to really recognize them, because some of our suppliers, we don't even know these are the suppliers, especially the craft industry if you take. The brands don't talk about them, so it's very important that we go back to see who is making, give them the recognition, so that actually the next generation will follow it, right? Right now, there is no recognition. So I think firstly, go back to the craftsmanship, start recognizing them, and then making them, for us, it's about making them a part of our family. We call them makers, our family of makers. They're equally important for us as our consumers. So I think first, recognizing them, bringing them to the story bringing them part of our whole supply chain. And then that will immediately, if we grow, I mean, for me, if I grow, they grow. So build that culture within a brand or business is very important, rather than just me being yourself. So that's the kind of the supply chain that we build. Transparency. You see them developing, you ask them, go back to them and ask, what do you want what is their vision? More than what's important to me is what's their vision. It might be a very simple thing. I'm like, what do you want to do next year? I mean, they might have told me that I want to send my child to English class. Simple as that, right? So my vision should align to theirs, and make sure that make sure that their child gets an English education. Simple things. We don't have to have so much of, I mean, the beauty is I'm also SME sector. They make micro, I might be the small one. So it's such an interesting thing how we kind of set our vision together rather than just our own visions as businesses, which supports the economy, because it's quite a lot in Sri Lanka, right? And the sustainable practices is something that I've learned through my practices and the Making Matters program, that I started off the Making Matters project to see where upcycling started. Working especially with creatives like Anoma, Tashiana, Taji, and Jonathan, who are creatives, but who takes back this sustainable practice way back, right? So right now, everybody thinks sustainability is trend. No, it's been in Sri Lanka, it's been there, right? So you don't have to follow a trend of being sustainable or organic or anything when it's been it's in us, right? So that's exactly where we started realizing, we've had sustainable practices. Our parents, Tashiana in the video says that my parents said this. Anoma says his father, how he was set up in her house, she grew up in it. So it's given to us. Rather than making it a trend, we just need to regenerate our own practices, value our own practices. Like Randula said, we are holding on to the wrong end. just get back to our values. Economically, we are right. We can come up, because if we use that as a unique selling point for our products, for our businesses, just need to, we are ahead. It's just that we are holding on to a wrong end, thinking of too much of policies and things, and we are struggling. So that's where I think what is important is supply chain. We have two things. We have that contribution coming from the SME sectors. Let's make them powerful. We have our own practices, which is embedded in our society and our SMEs to a lot of small businesses. Let's make use of it. Let's start valuing it more. So I think that's where I think the supply chain is very important at this moment.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Lonali. And so to my next question, I'm going to actually connect the values that you said have been in our society for centuries. But then to something that Randula picked up in her presentation, using and treating technology as a means rather than the end. So in our creative economy context and where we need to grow to, what's the role and how do we use innovation to amplify those kind of values that Lonali touched upon so that we actually generate more growth and we like to say amplify the impact, scale the impact. So in a creative economy, how do we bring those two together and what do we need to be conscious of, mindful of when we do that connection?
Check. That's a very good question, Vikum. How do we scale the good and not lose the essence of the good? And how do we connect the right dots and get them scaled together in the spectrum of good? That's really essentially the journey that we are on, and we are in the process of right now creating a regenerative business model canvas. Tomorrow is our first set of pilots beginning at 8:30 a.m. in the morning, and we really, really intend that that would show the way for Sri Lankan corporates to get into that mindset and follow the way, learning from entrepreneurs like you guys, Vikum. You ask me, how do we do it? You're doing it yourself. Of embracing innovation and technology into an inherent practice of craft, to tell the stories of the sources and the origins, to give access to the end custodian, not the user, but the end custodian, to know the story of the craftsman and to know about Dumbara Sri Lanka, to know about the Hana, the most lucrative carbon absorption tree that we are growing here in Sri Lanka. These are stories we can take out to the world through technology, not just through social media, but things like blockchain. Just a couple of days ago, we were at the relaunch of Selling Textiles, and we are very proud to call her our friend who embraced this technology to take it into the craft sector. It's happening already, and we just need to amplify. But when we are amplifying it, what we really need to keep in mind is that we are coming together to the right values, and people with right values are coming together to scale the good or to scale the innovative creation in the creative sector. Because what happens and what we've seen happening to most of the entrepreneurs we work with is they're very invested in purpose, they're very invested in the right mindset, regenerative mindset, and comes in an investor or comes in a technological innovator who doesn't share the same values but see the potential this product carries as a very lucrative financial profitable model. And once they connect, the experience really isn't that great because the values are mismatching and one ends up getting used and one ends up just taking all the profits home. And that's where it breaks, and that's where creatives go back to their cocoon. And that's what has happened repetitively. And that's why it's important to have intermediaries, ecosystem partners who understands both of these worlds and gets them into one table and helps them understand their world and bring them to a middle point where they can connect in absolute transparency and authenticity and trust, where nobody's getting used, but they're really growing the pie together. So I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind.
Wonderful, brilliant. Thanks, Randula. So something that you also brought up there was defining the values, understanding the values so that you hold on to them without allowing technology, even financial capital, to dilute it. So that's where I would like to come to Tashan and you again. If you can share about your experience again from the residency. How did that residency help you in terms of both yourself, maybe even the other residents in the program, to introspect, look back at what you are doing, understand what are the core values to you, and how to really amplify it. If you could share some thoughts in terms of maybe the activities you did, some things that helped you to kind of understand about your own enterprise better.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we had basically to give you a snapshot of what the residency was. It was 5 days where a group of creatives were put together, and we were given kind of presentations and learning experiences and learning opportunities into different aspects of circular economies. So one of the things that we had the opportunity to kind of explore was just to explore ahangama and the different trades and crafts that's prevalent in the region, but also at very specific points in time that used to thrive or thriving at the moment. And one of the things that we learned, that I specifically learned, was the attention to detail that most of these craftsmen had, and the ability for them to constantly think of not just questions that are retrospective of their craft, but also of their community. And I think, especially from, this is a little cliche, but coming from the city, but I think coming from a completely different environment in which you are constantly confronted with, consumer culture, and it's a quick, fast-paced rhythm to life. The idea of just sitting back and kind of thinking through the different processes, impacts. Where do these stories come from? Where are they going, and who are they going to be consumed or being processed by? One of the things that I specifically learned was also the people behind these crafts, where their labor was going. How much recognition were they getting from it? And a lot of the times when we think of Sri Lankan artisans and craftsmen, we think that this is incredible work, it's indigenous, but it doesn't, and if it gets on the tourism line, that we will be able to get it out into the world. But as Randula mentioned, if you don't have the right partner with the values that sink in with community, with the core values that they believe are important, that mismatch could be even worse for those communities and for the lifestyle of sustainability that they have developed. So for me, being able to learn and to listen and to experience, even within that small snapshot of 5 days, with this other community of learners, was really exciting.
Brilliant. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think we've all visited a junkyard in Talpe Recycling. It was a proper junkyard. I mean, from proper food garbage, you had plastic to tires or whatever it is, right? And you had to walk on top of it. I do this as my livelihood, go to junkyards. And when I do go to junkyards, people look at me like I'm a stranger. But that day when I went with 10 of these creatives, oh my God, the enthusiasm they had gave me so much hope. To be honest, I've never seen someone being so enthusiastic. They were picking so much waste, trying to analyze it, take nice pictures. So I saw them being inspired of a junkyard, and I was so happy because every other time, like, I've looked like the stranger, and I had so much hope, to be honest. That's just my learning.
Yeah, the junkyard was great. It was like one of the best days. You just walked into, it was trash galore, but there was so much potential in terms of, we were looking at materials, shape, sizes, what was the lifeline of that particular product, what was the pollution, pollution impact, what you could do with it, the textures. I think all of us were kind of going a little wild in the junkyard space, but it was really exciting. It was an exciting learning experience to think of it as potential rather than waste.
Brilliant. And I think that's where it's also very important about how we frame things. I mean, if we call something waste, we, by definition itself, we actually disregard the value that is in there. So brilliant. And I know how excited Lonali gets when she sees things that can be reused. So finally, before we move on to Q&A, where we'll open up for any questions from the audience, Lonali, finally to you. So touching on how both Randula and Tashana spoke about the values, amplifying those, and technology. A creative economy is also about communicating like what Tashana said, the artisans, the craft, the effort. What's the role of storytelling, and how do we also be mindful when we do the storytelling that we aren't appropriating other IP, we're being respectful towards it, but also communicating the right impact. So if you can share some final thoughts on those.
Yeah, so I think one important thing is, even if you're a small brand or a small business, find what your impact is. Set your visions. Yes, KPIs are very much corporate word, but why not? You can also have your own KPIs, maybe towards sustainability, towards society, towards, make it up. You can be a creative and make up your own KPIs to suit your values. And that's where I think it starts, setting up your values, understanding it, and setting up. Once you have that, once you have a little bit of data collection, then you have a nice story to tell. The data is important because right now everybody can say anything. You can get popular. You just need some money to get paid and get it across. But if you have right data, you build a conscious consumer who's loyal to you, right? Honesty. You need that going forward. You're not gonna, you might sell one product or you have one follower, but you will have the right long-term people with you, a movement with you, if you tell them the right story. So I think it's getting the honesty and making them believe on something. That's very hard, not like paying an ad and getting followers. So I think storytelling, data proves a lot. Data plays a huge role in your storytelling. And other ways, I think keeping things very simple. Show yourself, show your process, show who's making, show who's in your system, show who's friends, who you're friends with, show what they do. It's such a simple thing because social media is so easy now. It's just so easy. If you show them what exactly goes on, it's so hard to build so-called stories just within, it's just there. So I think that the importance is data, impact, some measuring that you need to do with your core values or what you set up with, some goals. And then just being yourself as an entrepreneur, creative, how you work, show the world at what place. That's basically what has worked for me a lot.
Wonderful, thank you. So that's me finishing my questions. So I hope through the conversations we've had, we've been able to share some ideas, thoughts in terms of as creative enterprises, but I mean, this is just not limited to, even if you don't identify yourself as a creative enterprise. I mean, these are just I would say, universal truths in the way that probably we need to keep on working with. So if there's any questions, we have a couple of mics that are going around. If you have any questions to our wonderful panelists, please raise your hand and we will bring the mic next to you.
Hi all, I'm Shamodi. It's been wonderful. I think every bit of creative industries was inspiring, and I was actually feeling jealous, because I was seeing all the trailers and things before also. I was speaking to this lady, and I think saying that it looks amazing of the content sharing and the experience and everything. Even down to that, they got the chance to prepare their own meals, and it starts from there. It's amazing. Congratulations. My question is to Tashyana, right? Tashyana. But Lonali and Randula, please feel free to pitch in. I wanted to now, you spoke a lot about collaboration and about the makers, them being an essential part of the value chain. After the residency, how it has changed your perspective, or what are you doing at the moment to connect well or read their story better or bring their story into the light? So that's what I wanted to ask. I'm just basically asking for your experience or what you're doing at the moment. Thanks.
So I work in the arts, but I'm also a poet and I teach. And my work is much less practical than most. But the way that this experience has changed my perspective and the way that I work is also my attention to detail and production lining, especially in Sri Lanka. I am always confronted with the question of where is this coming from and where is it going? And what is my contribution in this product or this experience? But more specifically, I think for me, working with this group of people and the way that they've, in their specific businesses or practice and craft, the way that they interact with material, for example, and the way that they treat the products that they're working with has taught me a lot about sustainability. And so when I walk into a classroom and I'm teaching about Sri Lankan artisans and crafts, I'm always considering what are the impacts, what is the greatest story that is being missed out on, and what are the either histories that have been invisibilized or removed. So we're constantly asking these questions, and I think that that's something that we sort of miss out on, especially when we are in an economy in this position at the moment and we're constantly groveling for pennies, dollars, whatever it is. We tend to debase ourselves and not fully own the fact that we do have a history that is worth the time and effort to be valued sufficiently. And so I think processing that and making sure that that story gets told has been something that has become central to my practice. So yeah.
Super. Thank you, Tasha. That's a wonderful answer. I hope that's good. Yeah, brilliant. Any other questions? Feel free to ask any. We have Mumtaz over there.
Hi, I'm Mumtaz. Some of you know me. I'm from the World University Service of Canada. Randula mentioned very briefly about the role of intermediaries. We have SME representatives, we have sustainable practices, we talk about 300-year-old traditions. Can you all describe a little bit more how, as intermediaries, we can support in the growth of economic prosperity for Sri Lanka? What is the role? What are the things that we should stop doing? I love the fact that you're looking at collaboration. I think this week itself, I've gone to so many events, and I'm like, why couldn't all of this be in one event, right? And we should start doing this now. And just as an intermediary, supporting entrepreneurs, supporting incubators, accelerators, as well as MSMEs, like what should we do differently? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question and for recognizing that, the importance of it and what needs to be addressed there. I think most importantly, we are a country since the time that all of us are born. Tashi's much younger to us, but the rest of us here on this stage are all 87 borns, right? So we are born into a country of war. And we've seen very many more crises that came to us afterwards. Everything was man-made except the tsunami. And therefore, intermediaries, if you take a look at foreign missions or foreign economic development missions coming in, has always been there in the country. And there's some partnerships that goes over 60, 70 years. And not everybody speaks out loud about it, but the ripple effects of such partnerships and work done in silence are still prevalent to date. And it goes on to changing mindsets, to changing approaches of work, than merely building buildings, if you know what I mean. So I think the most important role an intermediary can do now, be it an international organization or a local intermediary, is really to recognize gaps where there is potential for collaboration, but there's so many replications or Me Too's happening, because we're too small of an economy, too small of an ecosystem to have too many people trying to do the same thing and solve the same pain point. There can be diversity across regions, sectors, and perspectives. But if you're all trying to compete with each other to solve the same problem, it really is counterproductive. And it is, there's a large role intermediaries can play to bring these people together and to grow that mindset to becoming much more collaborative and inducive towards collaborative and connected growth. I'll give you an example. The work that I did in Jaffna together with the Yala IT Hub about 5-7 years ago of onboarding a donor, a private sector partner, and this community organization together. All three players had massive trust issues because they've never worked with one another ever before. It took 2 years of just conversation. And it came about afterwards of them having a beautiful, most innovative community space in Jaffna that made their community and parent generations also convert their mindset into what innovation and entrepreneurship is in the end. The space might close in 3-5 years, but what ruptured in that society and what opened as a possibility stays, and that can replicate many more other possibilities. So those are small interventions. Doesn't take a lot of budgets, but it takes a lot of thinking and knowing a social fabric, so to speak, and to respond to the social, inherent more social nuances than copy-pasting something that has happened elsewhere. So I think working closely with local influencers or visionaries, I think, would make a lot of sense so that we grow the right things at the right places, if I answered your question.
Thanks, Randula, and thank you for that question. Any other questions? Oh, we have one at the back, please.
Thank you for the really valuable discussion. This question actually goes to either of the panelists and even maybe all of them and maybe even Vikum. So the question is, so in an era of people leaving out this country and all, and also there are people coming in, right? So we are also thinking about agroeconomy, agro-tourists coming in, thinking about spiritual tourism, people are talking about different other things, right? But in terms of creative industry, so we are from such a rich culture, right? If you take music, if you take arts, if you even take, we have our own language in that sense, right? So what is the part that we can play in that scenario if you take in terms of events that we can do together? Like maybe you came to this residency as different industries, like maybe it could be the same kind of area, but different people coming together and learn, right? But if you take holistically as a creative industry, what is the role that an events, what is the role that events can play in such kind of a, maybe to attract people to the country in an era of people leaving the country? Any of you? I don't know.
I think actually a really good person would be Randula, who is very much in the curation space for these kind of events.
I've talked
art.
too much today.
There's so much that you can talk about. I mean, if you'd like to answer, then maybe we can.
Yeah, I think a good example is Shehan Karunatilaka. I mean, one of us who really, really hit the world spotlight just a couple of days ago. And people like Vimukti, who's not here, who's supposed to be here. There's so much of talent. Muvindu is here, Mayun is here. So happy that you guys joined us. So there's so much of inherent talent, like you said, in the creative sectors and in the authenticity, or rather the very small niche uniqueness we have as an island. It really is a treasure. And the best thing that we can do is to dig it out ourselves, dig out this treasure we have within us ourselves and put a spotlight on it ourselves. It's not easy to do, to get money to come into arts, especially when we are in an economy in crisis. No, I mean, people ask whether we are crazy to be working in the creative sector to begin with, and what's in it. That question we got when we were working in food and agriculture 4 years ago, so this is only normal. But everybody will be talking about creative sectors like maybe in 4 or 5 years. This is just an early adoption problem. But really what we need to do is work together with people who can put in resources and money to create small-scale experiences. It doesn't have to be large-scale national conferences. It could be small things that can happen in stays or cafes or libraries, like Lak Mahal, the most beautiful thing that happened in Colombo very recently, the community library. So I think what's important is have small pockets of things that happens all over the country. Again, a favorite example from my favorite community in Jaffna that built a stall for kids to come and experiment building shapes and understanding design thinking alongside the Nallur festival. Nallur festival is a religious spiritual festival. There's a lot of diaspora coming into Nallur festival. And all of a sudden they see a place that their kids can go and experiment design thinking with the local most kids who don't speak a word of English, but they learn and collaborate through design thinking, through clay and shapes. These are just out-of-the-box things that our generation is doing, so we don't have to have a lot of money to create a spotlight to the right places. So just get ourselves out of the box and create those things, and just doing it, I think, is what we need to do.
Super, thanks, Randula. Just one thing to briefly add to Randula's answer was also that Sri Lanka has a very hugely, immensely underutilized cultural performing arts sector. And actually a lot of those cultural performers, those very specific villages that practice them, our next generations aren't taking those up. I think one really good case study would be, I think, most of you know the Chitrasena Dance Academy. Amazing. They are preserving a very long cultural inspired dancing tradition, but they're also not just doing it here, they're taking it beyond Sri Lankan shows, displaying it elsewhere and generating the interest for people to actually come down to Sri Lanka and see it. So I think there's also, when it comes to these event-oriented, performance-oriented, creative expressions, we should actually also look at taking tasters. I mean, we take tea. We take to our expos, tourism expos, we take tea. And likewise, I think it's about time we took something from the creative economy as well. So I think that's about the time we have. First of all, thank you to the wonderful panelists and your sharing your amazing experiences, thoughts, and to the audience. Thank you very much for listening in and your questions. I hope we've done justice to the time you've taken out of your busy schedules to be here today. And as there's going to be some refreshments, some mingling, some fellowship, so please do collaborate, talk, make connections and opportunities for collaboration. Thank you.
Is this working? Okay. So thank you very much for all our panelists and all of you here who were here to kind of make this event kind of memorable for us. And I think there's a lot that for us to take away from this event, I hope. Well, I certainly do. And so we're running late, and our next item is a band, The Drift, and there's refreshments also. So before we leave the stage, I would just like to say thank you to everybody who came, to Her Excellency Sarah Holton for being here, to Maria for making, being very supportive of this event and being a kind of partner all the way through. And of course to the wonderful team at GLX who made this happen. Just to say that this will be my last event at the British Council. So I'm very happy that we managed to make this happen despite the weather forecasts of incredible rain and thunder and so on. Thank you very much. And I'll just hand over to Emma.
No worries. Thank you so much, Menika. On behalf of Good Life X, I really would like to thank Menaka, Maria, and the entire British Council program for really giving us this opportunity, as well as our partner in crime, Lonali, and our whole Good Life X team, and everyone who was involved in the process, the residents, and the experts as well. And for today, Mr. Vikum, thank you so much for your valuable insights. I think a lot of people will be coming up and asking you many questions. So thank you all for joining us today. It's a wonderful event to honor the creative industries. And now to really celebrate, we have a lovely band, The Drift, who will come on here shortly. We have some wonderful food that's been creatively curated, and some drinks for you all to enjoy. So please do enjoy the rest of the evening, and we thank you for joining us today.
සීයා පටන් ගත්තේ කලාතනය 1944. අපිට ඒ කාලේ ඉඳන්ම කොස්ටියුම්ස් තියෙනවා. ඒ කොස්ටියුම්ස් වල කොටස් පාවිච්චි කරනවා අලුත් කොස්ටියුම් එකක් හදනකොට.
I had a father who was very much involved in alternative energy, alternative farming methods, and so I grew up with these ideas.
My grandmother was a pioneer in pairing batik with chain stitch. As a kid, I remember seeing her use material just lying around the house to stitch rugs and things.
My parents have taught us to save ice cream tubs, Astra cups, any plastic container actually, to store our leftover food and curries. It's a Sri Lankan thing.
Sustainability is nothing new to Sri Lankans. It has been a part of our culture, values, tradition, as well as local art forms like dance, painting, poetry, fashion, and even architecture for years. In a time when throwaway culture is becoming a huge threat to our environment, we felt the need to remind people of an age-old sustainable practice, which to date has no proper Sinhalese term: upcycling.
ගුරු වජිරා කියන්නේ මගේ සියා යාච්චි. කවුරු හරි අහුවම කොයි කාලෙද ඔයා නටන්න පටන් ගත්තේ? ඇත්තටම මට හිතා ගන්න බෑ කොයි කාලෙද කියලා. මොකද මතක කාලෙක ඉඳන් නටන එක තමයි කරේ. මෙතන කලායතනේ අලුතෙන් මෙතන ගුරු ගෙදරක් හැදුවා. ඉතින් ආච්චි එතනට මූව් වුණා මේ ළඟකදී. ගෙනාපු බඩුවල වැඩියෙන්ම තිබ්බේ එක එක යා එකතු කරපු රෙදි ಜಾති. මොනා හරි දෙයකට අවශ්‍ය වුණොත් එයාගේ ඒ පෙට්ටියකින් අරගෙන ඉක්මනට පාවිච්චි කරනවා.
I did 7 exhibitions since 2005 on climate change, long before it was called climate change, right? So it was my first exhibition on it was in Sydney. It's very much showing man being very small and insignificant in the space of the environment.
So I've been working as an architect but also helping out with the craft center called the Aluvihara Heritage Center, which works with batik. How I approach like architecture and things like that, we're always looking to see how can I minimize the waste I produce from the onset. I think there's like beauty in like everyday things, and eventually those things might come together into something.
I write because I need to get clarity on a subject. I need I need to understand something better. I don't know if I can consider myself or advertise myself as a sustainable person, because I feel there's always more that you can do. I think with a lot of people who've just grown up in Sri Lanka, it's something that, your parents have taught you, you've just grown into.
ඔසරිය ස්ටයිල් එක අපිට ටිකක් දැන් කරන නැටුම් එක දැන් යන නිර්මාණ එක ටිකක් අමාරුයි මනුව කරන්න ඇඟ එහෙම ඒ කියන්නේ කකුල් වැඩියෙන්ම ටිකක් රිස්ට්‍රික්ට් වෙනවා. I think ඒක කොහොමද අපිට ටිකක් වෙනස් කරලා නැවත භාවිතා කරන විදිහට හදා ගන්න පුළුවන් කියලා බලන්න.
I love cloth as well, so that's why some of the images Even what was used for the Venice Biennale was printed on cloth. I mean, I just don't want to throw them away.
This is one of my most treasured items. Two of my friends were traveling, and they were the first two people that I ever shared my writing with. They got me this bag, but it kind of started disintegrating a few years ago. For the longest time, telling myself that I will get it fixed and make sure that I will reuse it and keep it with me.
What I'm going to give you are multiple scraps from an architectural project. The batik was done by the ladies at the Alvihara Heritage Center.
Wanna take you for a ride on the beach, wanna take you for a ride on the beach, be my lover, my lady river. Wanna take you higher. She smells the daisies, oh, she smells the daisies. She drives me crazy, oh, she drives me crazy. Yeah, I wanna take you on a ride on a beach airplane. I wanna take you on a ride on a beach airplane. Wanna take you on a ride on a beach airplane. Wanna take you on a ride on a beach airplane. Yeah. your dream. I'm a fiber.